lot of things become self-evident. It's really collective.
On this episode of A Call to Leadership, we take a deep dive into what it means to be inspiring and aspiring as an entrepreneur, especially in the volatile area of the tech sector. Well, if you've ever thought, man, I need to overcome challenges, I need to make my dream a reality, I've had setbacks, I've had rejections, I've had moments of self-doubt, this is the episode for you. We're going to talk with Jake Whitfield, who has been on the show before, one of my students, just a dear friend in the business and the spiritual and the life space. He's got an unwavering commitment to his vision and his ethos. I can't wait for you to listen in. You will be inspired. I'm Dr. Nate Sala, and this is A Call to Leadership.
There's a really good chance that it was on my end.
No, it's okay. That's the thing about tech, right? As you know, better than just about anybody.
Don't even get me started. That's a whole podcast for a whole nother time.
Yeah, and I'd like to have an episode on just that, right? Like navigating text, just how tech does not serve us well.
Expect the unexpected and never anticipate to actually get things when you think you're going to get them.
Yeah, for sure. No, and these are great lessons. In fact, us starting this episode with technical difficulties, right? It's the quintessential aspect of leadership, right? Expect difficulty every step of the way. And just having a conversation around, starting our conversation around, certainly around how we met, but why that was important, right? Because I want you to talk a little bit about how we met, but I also want to talk about what your mindset is at every juncture of these meetings, because I believe that you're the kind of person who is very intentional about your decisions. I mean, down to the granular decision. And I think our audience will benefit from understanding how that mindset moves you forward and propels you to want to accomplish great things during the time you have on this planet.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first and foremost, I appreciate you having me on. I hope anything that I share can be value to anybody listening. I certainly have benefited from you tremendously and also from just listening to podcasts like this and listening to people that have done the things that I aspire to do. And so I hope in any small capacity that anybody else finds value is well worth my time. So anyway, so to rewind back, this was in July, I think, of 2020. I just started VidHire, which is the software HR platform that I lead. I started that May 10th of 2020. I mean, what kind of crazy person starts a new tech platform in the middle of a pandemic? But that's just kind of how everything played out. One of the things that I'm a big believer in, Nate, is just this concept of mastering your context. And I think that there's a lot to be said about responding as opposed to reacting to what happens. Obviously, we're going to get thrown all kinds of curveballs. This last 18 months has been no exception. If anything, it's really made us question, how do we look at the world and what do we expect from it in terms of this idea of safety or really being comfortable where we are? That's just not life. Life continuously is going to throw us curveballs. And so when we met in July of that year, I'm in about 3 months into the company. There's a worldwide pandemic. I can't talk to anybody in person. Everybody's kind of holding on to their money. There's not a lot of money going around in terms of venture capital, in terms of just investing. People are scared. And when people become scared, they kind of tend to become recluse and kind of back away from things. I have a different perspective. A lot of times when it comes to what people look at as problems, I really see a tremendous opportunity. I'm a big believer. I use these quotes, but I really like to live by them. They're not just these cliche quotes of, hey, problems are opportunities. I genuinely believe that. And so for me, it was one of those things where I had this small business where I was hiring college kids to make balloon art, these restaurants, and then we'd hire them out to do private parties. We call them the 3 Bs: birthdays, bar mitzvahs, and baptisms. I grew up in a large Jewish community, so bar mitzvahs, when boys and girls turn 13, they become adult and they have these big parties. And so I capitalized on that. We'd hire these guys out for $125, $150 an hour. I do the baptisms were within the Hispanic community, the baptizing a child, it's a huge deal. And they have almost weddings, size banquets. And so we capitalized on that. a lot of great food from that context. That was really fun. And then obviously birthday parties and whatnot. So I had this business going. It was doing pretty well. I was living in downtown Chicago. I'd started this business. I didn't go to school, didn't really have the traditional route. Most of my friends did. They were in corporate banking. They were in all these really fancy jobs. But truth be told, a lot of them really miserable. They teased me and they called it the clown business. How's the clown business going? So I'd started this business and I really got their attention about 3 years in when I'd started getting a ton of traction. We had a first 6-figure kind of year. I decided to really enjoy the rewards from that business. I moved downtown into this building. There was basketball court, there was pool. I'd have everybody over. So doing really well. I was really planning a bigger move into technology. So this was, the initial concept idea was started. This was, I think, in the spring of 2019. And one of the things that you touched on is just this notion that I know what I don't know. And one of the aspects of mastering the context is finding the people to get you there. And so fast forward, I'm going back and forth here. Started the business in Chicago, was doing well, was planning on going into technology. The world turned upside down. I had Chicago shut down completely. So this business that was generating tremendous revenue, we had our best month in February, which is usually a down month. Going into March, I'm feeling really good. We're about to get spring break. We're about to expand. And everything kind of turned and changed. And Illinois was one of the first states to lock down everything. And so these partnerships we had with restaurants, all of them closed. And so we went to zero revenue, not like a 80% cut, we went literally no revenue for 3 months. And any business, even one that's been in business for years, is going to struggle in that context. And so
let me stop you right there, because this is an important thing. I'd like to just kind of hang out here for a minute. When that happens, when it happened to you, so this is back to your talking about mastering your context versus surrendering to your context, right? This is an area that I believe in wholeheartedly. When that happens, so many entrepreneurs have different perspectives on it. Some of them freeze. Some of them go into like some kind of a hole. Some of them try to adapt and overcome. What were you thinking at the time? Like once that happened, and just be transparent. Like, were you afraid? Were you thinking, oh crap? Were you thinking, do I need to regroup, or this is all good, I got this covered? Walk us through that.
Yeah. So, it was a big bummer initially. Obviously, we were doing really well. I think I've kind of learned I'm a big believer when something happens, it's 90% is how you respond. And so we all have this initial jolt reaction. I was concerned for my team. I had people that weren't trusted me. So that was my first thought, was just concerned for them. The second thought was, okay, there's a lot of uncertainty. What can I be certain about? That was the first thing. Like, what can I absolutely know that I can count on? And that was my attitude. Something as simple as that is really powerful, right? So everybody's afraid. All of a sudden we have to do Zoom calls. I come on there and I have a jolt of excitement and, hey, we're going to figure this out. I'd start these Zoom calls with, hey, what are we grateful for today? What is it that we can focus on that we're thankful for? We're all healthy at that time. And so the initial reaction, I go to the team. And the second one is like, okay, how can I improve the situation? And the first thing I came up with was like, okay, I got to fortify, because people are going to be concerned. Fear doesn't necessarily bring out the best in human nature. And so I knew that as the leader of this team, and this wasn't even technology yet, this was my business with these balloon artists, like they were going to look to me and how I responded. And a lot of how their actions is going to be predicated based on just my ethos, if you will. And so that was the first thing, was like, hey, I got to mentally fortify, not just for me, but for everybody else. Does that make sense?
Man, that's good. Yeah, no, that mental fortification, your ethos, the vibe you give, like your followers, whoever it is on your team and trusting you, they are watching your every move, what you say, how you react, your body language, all of it is important to them to know, are we going to be okay? I look at leadership, and I think it's been said like this. Of course, lots of different ways to look at leadership, but one of the ideas of leadership is that it's conferred authority, right? Your followers confer authority to you. They allow you to lead them, right? And so it's an exchange. So some social psychologists and anthropologists say that there's this exchange, whether it's in nature, among other species and humans, we exchange this level of authority for security. So I will be obedient in exchange for you helping me to have security. And so what you're talking about is like, can I feel secure even in the storm? And that doesn't necessarily mean things are going to go great, right? I mean, even in the storm, like you could go to zero revenue and stay there and all your team could disperse. And you might have that might be an end game and has to be for the moment, but at least you are prepared to take those steps together. And I think that's an important piece to leadership. And I'm glad you brought that up, is that external, like how do people perceive me even in this moment? And if I have to take a moment to regroup, then I probably should do that in private.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's something to be said. I've walked you through this before, but I've got different frameworks that I work off of in terms of like how I talk to myself. I don't know how that's going to sound, but a huge part of how you perceive and see the world is the language that you use internally in your mind and the words that you use. And then also what type of input that you're getting externally is going to affect the way you think. And so right away, one of the first things I did was I cut off all news. Like in my mind, it was like news in a large part is almost a fear machine. They capitalize on people's fears. And so the first thing I decided, because I've learned this a while back, is that the words we use and the inputs that we get are constantly rewiring our brain. Even our conversation we're having right now, the inputs that we get are going to put us in a certain mental state. We're going to see the world through that mental state. Now, there's a song when we were little in Sunday school, be careful, little eyes, what you see. Be careful, little ears, what you hear. For the Father up above, right? It was this child song, but basically saying, like, protect what type of input you're getting, because that's going to affect everything. It's going to affect how you think. It's going to affect, how you feel, your stress, which can affect your health, right? So being able to really stand captive at the door of your mind, your ears, your eyes, and be able to filter, hey, what kind of inputs do I want to take in, as opposed to just passively absorbing everything? Because otherwise you're just going to be with everybody else.
Dude, that is so huge. I love the way you even frame that, passively absorbing everything. How much of our day is this passive absorbing, where we're not putting the boundaries up, the barriers to our mind, our eyes, our spirit, and really taking control of what we can control of what the environment that we put ourselves in. It's 100%. Even those listening today who perhaps are exposing themselves to certain stimuli that are not going to get them or improve their lives or transform them into the person they want to be, right? So I think in some ways we have to start our day with preparing ourselves. Like, what is it that I will allow to be a part of my understanding? What is it that I'm going to put myself in? Who am I going to speak with? What mentors do I have around me? What information am I going to observe? And is it something that's going to help me move forward? I love the way you described that, because I don't know that, I mean, even in my own life, sometimes I forget that I passively allow things beyond the gate of my life that have no business being there.
Yeah. I mean, I heard this great analogy by a guy named Jim Rohn. He said, if you've got a cup of coffee and you're stirring the cup and your worst enemy comes by and accidentally drops or puts some sugar in your coffee, what's going to happen? What's the worst thing that's going to happen? You're going to have a sweet cup of coffee. But if your best friend or somebody, a close family member, accidentally puts some strychnine in your coffee, that's going to kill you, right? And so the premise was protect your coffee, protect what goes into it. As grandma always used to say, garbage in, garbage out, right? Like protect what type of stimuli, what type of input you're getting, because that's going to drastically affect your mental state, which in turn is going to affect how you operate.
So your mindset, now how much of that, because I'd like to take this rabbit hole. All right. This is a good one. And I know that we probably have like a dozen episodes that we could shoot together. So let's just go down this rabbit hole, because there's got to be a driver in our lives that is conscious and is discerning and is intentional about how we perceive the world and what we allow in our purview. What drives you daily to know how and what do you allow to become a part of your daily life?
So as you know, my faith is really the foundation of everything. And so two things that I really go to in the Bible, it talks about, and again, this is my context, that I'm sharing, but there's a verse in Philippians 4:8, whatever is lovely, whatever is good. Basically, I call it the 4:8 test, right? Like 4:8 it, right? If you're going to approach something, you're going to watch something, like, would it pass that particular verse? And I encourage you to look it up. I should have that to memory. But Philippians 4:8 basically talks about, whatever is good, whatever is lovely, whatever is fruitful, focus on those things. So that's one context. And the other one, this is the understanding that the Bible talks about, I am a part of a royal priesthood. So basically, what my creator, what God tells me is I'm royalty in his eyes. And so when you are given a certain position, there's certain things that are unbecoming of that particular position. And so for me, it's like, if I look at the context that this is the position that I've been given in terms of my faith, and that based on that, there's a certain way to operate, I try to hold myself to that standard. And so I think a couple things that really a driving factor in my life. In my early 20s, I had a really rough start. I was a part of the foster care system. I was adopted. I had a lot of challenges early on, born into a household that was riddled with violence, domestic abuse, poverty. And then I was adopted when I was about 12 years old. And so a lot of the context that I was born into really didn't have its max effect until my early 20s. So I battled with a lot of mental health challenges and just trying to process through a lot of that. I started to seek professional counseling when I was around 21. And for the last 9 years, I'm coming up on almost 400 hours with a professional psychologist. And one of the things that, and I highly, highly, highly recommend just about anyone to help process through things. And so I know what it's like to be in a state where things are really dark and gloomy and there's no hope. And so for me, I've learned certain tools and certain things to help keep me in a clear state and help keep me in a place of empowering thought processes and empowering states of mind. And so that's a huge, my faith, and then just the mental health part of keeping me clear. And then also just knowing that there's people that I'm responsible for now. As a leader, you take that responsibility on. And so I just know that there's a lot of people counting on me. And between my faith, the mental health part, and then just knowing that I have people to lead, I begin each day with just a process that I have to go through in order to get myself into this state so I can best make the decisions for myself and the people that I lead.
Wow. I was talking with a friend not too long ago, and we were talking about who you believe you are is so incredibly important and has so much of it affects your trajectory. It affects everything about you. And, the fact that you identify as though you have worth, you have value, right? You have purpose because of who you are and who you're called to be. Was there ever a period in your life where you did feel worthless?
Yeah, that's a great question. The answer to that is yes. And one of the things I want, a big foundational piece that when I get an opportunity to kind of speak in other people's lives, I always tell them, you're never going to outperform your self-image. Mm-hmm. I want to say that one more time. You're never going to outperform your self-image. How you see yourself, what you feel you deserve, that is going to have a profound effect on how you view the world. So I was 21 years old. I just started this business in network marketing. It took off. And all of a sudden, I was more successful than I internally believed I should be. I was a kid that was born, I was one of 16 kids from the same two parents, born in poverty in Chicago on the West Side. I was adopted into a very privileged area. And so from age 12 on, I lived in a very privileged environment, but I never felt worthy of that. And so I think that when I got to my early 20s, I went into business at 19. I took off with this company. I was a network marketing company, over 300,000 distributors. I shot up number 17 in the company. And all of a sudden, I'm being told how great and how talented I am. And everyone can tell you those things, but if you don't believe it internally, and if you don't believe you have that kind of value, I like to liken it to, my psychologist always says, your thermostat always reaches back to that baseline, right? So the thermostat, you set it to a certain degree temperature, you want it at 72. Well, you can shoot up to 90, but eventually it's going to work back to 72. It can drop down to 50, but you're going to work back down to that baseline. And I think that baseline is how you view yourself and the value that you have. And so in my early 20s, it was really a difficult time to figure out, okay, what kind of value do I have? And I had to come back to my faith, frankly, because somebody once told me, like, if you want to put your trust into something that can be taken away from you, that's the quickest way to anxiety. And so for me, I started reconnecting kind of with my faith at a level I hadn't before, which was just this notion that my value came from God who created me. And that's the value that he instilled with me. So that was the very foundational piece. And then the next part of it was my relationship with myself. I find that the best way to really build that self-esteem is self-discipline, making commitments to yourself and following through on those commitments over time. That's what's really going to build that foundational value for yourself. That's my opinion.
There's someone listening today who is in the place that says, I feel worthless. I don't feel worthy. I don't have the discipline, and I don't even know where to start. What do you say to that person? Maybe that was you. What would you say? Because they look at you and they say, this is an aspiring entrepreneur who is clearly focused and driven and has a mentality that will not stop while he has breath in his lungs. But that's so far and foreign to me because I would love that, but I'm not there. I mean, what are some baby steps that maybe you took early on, or maybe even some bigger steps? Maybe you didn't always take baby steps. Walk us through that.
Sure. So I would say the first thing, life's a team game. When you try to play this thing solo, that old cliche, you take a stick and you can break it in half. You take 5 of the same type of sticks, you put them together, and it's much more difficult to break. And so one of the first things that I would recommend, and really this speaks really to my heart because I've been there, and I was at that point where there were times where life didn't seem worth living and in some really dark areas. And I think the first thing I would say is you got to find people that you can lean on and can hold you up at times where you can't hold yourself up. I would say the first thing. The second thing I would say is find some person or some place where you can be of service. This sounds counterintuitive, but if you can find some type of homeless shelter or a soup kitchen or find somewhere to volunteer, to give of yourself. When you're feeling at your lowest, I remember my parents would drag me to church because my mom worked at the church, and it did all these packing seeds for families in Africa. We did helping the church move things to prepare for a service. When you're in service to other people, it gets you out of this spiraling self-focus. And frankly, a lot of depression, which I was clinically depressed at the time, it's a hyper self-focus on your problems and what's going on with you. And I find there's a huge therapeutic component to helping other people and dealing with their problems. Sometimes that really puts your life into context. So I think a great support system, but get plugged in somewhere where you can serve somebody else and kind of take the focus off. And I think those are the first baby steps, and I can go on from there. But foundationally, kind of getting outside of your problems in your life, I think it's going to give you an opportunity to just breathe.
100%, man. That's huge. I love it. In fact, as you were saying that, the verse came to my mind, a cord of 3 strands is not easily broken. And isolation is super fast way for you to just spiral into just this aloneness and further depression. I 100% agree. In fact, it reminds me of I was with a friend several months ago who was just in a really tough spot. And I asked, are you surrounded by people who can help lift you up? Like, no, I've been totally isolated. Well, that's step 1, right? When it's like, well, that's why I'm here to hang out with you. I was like, okay, great. That's a great start, right? Because I will be there. And then the second step, and I said the exact same thing. I love how you put it, right? Go serve others who are in maybe a tougher spot than you. And you start to realize that, wow, I can actually do a couple things. One is that maybe things aren't as bad as I thought. And 2, that I actually have a purpose where I can help other people along the way. I even told my son, he was going through some stuff several years ago. And I said, let's just go to the cancer ward at the children's hospital and let's go help some kids. Because I got a pretty good feeling that once we do that some of these challenges that you think you're facing with maybe gaming or things aren't going right, whatever it is, I don't want to trivialize because everybody's challenges are valid and real and we should empathize. But it's a huge way to help frame and reframe our own obstacles. And then from there, moving forward, just begin to illuminate a better path, right? I really think that there's 2 kinds of hope, at least 2 kinds of hope. On the one hand, there's hopelessness, and hopelessness, things only as they are, which times as they are, they can look bleak and lonely and dreary. I mean, if you just look around, like you said with the news, they're in the business of fear. And so that's the moneymaker for them. And so honestly, man, if I don't watch the news like for like 6 months or even a year, I feel like when I turn it back on, I didn't miss a thing. And it's important to understand current events. And I'm not saying to isolate yourself and to be non-observant, but at the same time, there's just this continuing loop of like everything that's going wrong in the world. And I think that if you just surround yourself with that, then your brain will, like you said, and it's not just us that say it. I mean, these are clinical studies also observe the rewiring of the brain to focus on the negative, right? But the other kind of hope is hopefulness. And hopefulness sees things as surely as they can be, right? And so walk me through your idea. What does hopefulness look like as we move toward like our initial encounter in, of all places, the Branson landing in Branson, Missouri?
I was just there. It made me think of you. I would say there's a great kind of dichotomy in terms of people often say, hey, be realistic. And that's actually, truth be known, that's my least favorite word, like ever. Besides no, I think that's the word that I've gotten the most from people. I think that I've learned that when you seek something, so for example, if you seek comfort, the quickest way to achieve comfort is to pursue adversity. There's this odd kind of thing. The greatest way to achieve a lot is to give a lot. To acquire a lot is to give a lot. And so when I look at the context of hope and hopelessness, because I've been at the hopeless one time in my life, one period of my life where I just didn't see any hope. I've been there. But the thing that I've found is when it comes to the future, it's so many people will limit themselves in terms of what they can see for themselves because they don't know the how, right? And so in their mind, they have to figure out the how before it's ever possible. And my dad used to say, Jake's a fire, aim, ready approach with things. Again, I think there's balance, and I think there's a lot to be said about having a plan and having a really progressive plan going forward. But initially, you've got to see something that's compelling. There's a compelling vision for something that makes you want to jump out of bed and have this mentality that, hey, I'm going to be able to figure it out, right? This is this hope and understanding that, hey, whatever comes my way, I'll find a way. I'll find a person, I'll find a connection, I'll find a way. And just having that belief, I was listening to Steve Jobs' commencement speech to Stanford a couple of days ago, and he talked about this idea that being able to believe that the dots will connect. You can always tell, looking backwards, it's easy to connect the dots, but believing that the dots will connect going forward will give you that type of fortified belief system to push towards the next endeavor. And so I think that hope for me is just something that is so exciting and so compelling that it kind of oozes from you. I think that's a great starting point in terms of putting a vision forward, something that you look at and say, hey, if I could do that, if I could get there, right? If I could at least even just start going in that direction, it's going to be much more exciting than where I am right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that resonates with me. In fact, vision by definition is optimistic. Right? So it's naturally optimistic because who wants a pessimistic vision? Like who wants to go someplace that's worse than you have today? The heart of vision is better, right? A better future state. It has to have optimism. It has to have that energy that is so attractive. It's like, yes, that's where I want to go. And the beauty, I think, of visionary leadership, which I would classify you as a budding visionary leader. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to have you involved in these conversations, because we often have conversations with or about visionary leaders after they achieve all this vision. So it's nice on the front end to understand some of the mechanics of how you think, because we need visionary leaders. You mentioned Steve Jobs, right? His idea of vision of connecting the dots along the trajectory, as you know, a lot of my research has been around him, at least academically. And nothing wrong with Tim Cook, but Tim Cook is just not a visionary leader. And so he's not the kind of guy that's going to really push for this transformational model that says, hey, you know what, let's disrupt our own technology and just blow everybody away with what can be, even though it can't be today. right? Because even when Jobs was considering what would kill his iPod, that was part of his vision, was like, okay, look, the iPod's going great, but the cell phone could kill the iPod. Let's invent one that everybody would want, right? And so 4 years later, it's becoming a reality. But I got a pretty good feeling that internally, like, this idea of yours, this idealistic, unrealistic activity of making this real is just not possible today, right? So do you look at your future vision and say, okay, I know with the resources that are available today, this is not possible? Almost like getting to the moon, right? When Kennedy wanted to get to the moon, it wasn't possible when he announced it, but it became possible over the next, I guess, close to a decade. How do you think?
That's a great question. So I like to spend time. We used to have these, right now we're much more of an operational component of the company, but we're going to bring these back shortly because these are some of my favorite times. We call them Free Thinking Fridays, where I like to suspend my mind. And I think that for me, something that's compelling and exciting is this ability to, almost like a kid, just suspend everything that is right now and focus on what could be. You told me a lot about, Walt Disney had this vision for Epcot, before he passed, of this fully functioning, crime-free city, almost this utopia, if you will. And the reality at the time, and this was in the 50s and the 60s, there's a lot of racial tension, there's a lot of strife, there's a lot of, when people talk about the US being divided right now, I think people have a short memory of what we've gone through as a country and what we continue to work through. As far as the future, I think that I like to ask questions. I think when you make statements, it closes the mind. A statement is like just a definitive, this is what it is. When I come across something, instead of saying, hey, this can't be done, how can it be done?
Yeah.
Right? That's the question. I love that. If it were possible, how could it be done?
I love that you brought Disney up, because some would argue and say, well, hope's not a strategy, right? You may have heard that, but that's not the role. Is really
try telling President Obama that he won an entire campaign on one slogan.
And it worked, right? But it's not necessarily that it's a strategy, but it's based on timing, right? So the initial construct is, what's the grand vision? And so Walt was constantly trying to push far beyond the envelope of what was possible. And Roy would always say, well, it's just not possible. It's not realistic. We don't have a strategy for this. And what Walt would come back and say, yeah, I get that. I totally get that. But that's why we have to start with imagination. And then we move into engineering. That's why he had his Imagineers, right? So he didn't call them Enginationers, because you don't start with engineering and then you end with imagination. He knew the proper application was Imagineers. Let's imagine what's not possible, and then we'll engineer it. Is that how you think as well?
Absolutely. I might even adopt that in terms of that term. 100%, Nate. Like, for me, the way I look at it, so we've got a platform. In a lot of ways, the product itself, it's a software product. It's not as futuristic as some of the products that Jobs had developed or that Disney foresaw. Not to say that there aren't ones in the works. Stay tuned. But as far as like where can we take this? I'll tell you a story. So I was still running my business with the balloons, and I was training this new guy, and I made this connection. I'm at a restaurant. The guy goes, we were talking, I was making, and then we started this conversation about his work. And that's usually a great opportunity to try to recruit people onto the platform. So we started this conversation, and, I was telling him about the platform. He was super intrigued. We were talking a while. And then his wife goes, so what's the long-term game plan for this? And I looked at her and I said it without even it just kind of came out of me without even really thinking. I was like, we're going to take on Facebook. And she goes, I love that. And I think I looked at it in the context afterwards. I'm like, here's this guy making your kid balloons. In his mind, he's talking about taking on Facebook. I mean, that's crazy, right? And I think that when it comes to a vision of what the future is, the how initially is not as important, right? I think that people they talk themselves out of a lot of different things because they don't know the how yet. And so for me, I'm a big believer in start going in that direction. And it's amazing when you start to visualize something with such a compelling vision and that's at the forefront of your mind constantly, it's amazing the pieces that kind of come into play in terms of moving and making an actualization. So I think that, there's this old saying that if you hang around a barber shop long enough, you're bound to get your hair cut. Basically meaning that if you're constantly thinking about and in the space of this is what's got to happen, what do I need? And you're constantly thinking and have it at the forefront of your mind. It's amazing what your mind will be programmed. Your mind is a lot like a cervical mechanism, which is like a heat-seeking missile has that same cervical mechanism where it'll track down. A missile will shoot straight ahead. The one with the cervical mechanism in it, the heat-seeking missile, will constantly be searching and following that path. So when you start with this compelling vision and it kind of frames the way you think, all of a sudden you're able to identify aspects of things that you never were before, right? And so if you're just focused on the how, right, and you don't know the how yet, you'll talk yourself out of something. If you have a compelling vision for something, the how will take longer. And don't get me wrong, when it comes to a guy like Tim Cook, you need that kind of leadership too, operationally. But you need it in tandem with a vision. And I think that a lot of times what you wrote your paper on or your dissertation on, vision is so important because it's the emotional engine that pushes you towards something better. For me and for our team, I kind of lead on that front and I find the other people to fill in the other spots. And so I have this saying that it's not the how, but who. So in my view, when I look at something, I'm just like, hey, I've got a compelling vision for something. There's a lot of hard skills that I don't know how to do. And I could take time to try to figure those things out, but that would be really a waste of my time. When I could actually find the person that's not only just passionate about that, but has years of experience, that's how the how kind of comes into play. So I'm a big believer that the vision comes first, and that's going to lead you to identifying all the other pieces, and those will fall in line after the fact.
You talked about problems and opportunities, and I think that's really an important aspect of creating vision. In fact, sometimes problems, opportunities, a response to knowing that I'm always got to be in problem solving mode and I've got to manufacture opportunities through problem solving. And I believe all business is problem solving. When you think about how you form your vision, do you focus on what kind of problems are in my purview, my context, in my wheelhouse, or is my skill sets? How do you come up with your ideas?
Yeah. So the first thing I like to do, Nate, I heard this analogy one time. I think it's really, I'm big on analogies because I'm a visual kind of learner. If you took a glass of water, right, like this, it's very, very light. If I pick up the glass of water and then I set it down, there's not a whole lot of burden with that. Now, if I picked this up and I had to hold it out in front of me for an hour, it might strain my arm. If I had to hold it out all day, my hand would be paralyzed, right? And it's the same cup of water. So the type of burden that we carry really is predicated on how long that we focus on it. What I try to do, Nate, is I'm a big believer that many minds together solve problems. So I identify a problem. I'll take some time on it, but as quickly as I can, I'll pass it to somebody else and have their perspective on it, right? I'll pick up the glass of water, right? Then I'll set it down or I'll hand it to somebody else. And so one of the things that I found when it comes to problems, there really are opportunities in disguise. And I think that a lot of times perspective and different viewpoints, this is why I'm a huge believer in, not just a pluralistic society, but like a pluralistic ideology where people come in from very different perspectives and have a completely different way of looking at things that can help solve problems. So I'm not arrogant enough to think I'm going to be able to solve all the problems. But what I do find is that if I can identify the problem and then take some time on it, but quickly put it in the hands of somebody else, and then we can kind of come back to the table. And so a lot of times what I'll say is, hey, here's the challenge when it comes to a software bug or problem, or it comes to something operationally or business development. We bring the problem to the table. I'm not a huge believer in long meetings. I used to do hour-long meetings to try to figure things out. What I find is that ideas can change everything, right? A creative solution to something can change things. So the way I look at it is when there's a problem, I'll pick up the cup, I'll spend some time on it, but then I have this assurance that there's other people that are going to spend time on the same problem. And I'm going to come up with a couple ideas that I have. I'm going to come to the table and I'm not going to say anything. I'm going to say, hey, here's obviously the problem. What are your thoughts? And from my standpoint as a leader, this is one of the most challenging things for me as somebody who's never been accused of not having something to say. I have to learn how to speak last, right? So I get to the table, there's a problem at hand. And for me, it's an opportunity to get everybody else's input, everybody else that I've passed the cup to. And the only thing I'm really allowed to do is ask questions to clarify what they're meaning by what they're presenting. And at the end of the conversation, when I've had the input of everybody, then I can present my perspective. So I think, again, part of this, and I said this early on, life's a team game. Everything you're going to do, you really want to leverage the team. You want to leverage a lot of different perspectives, as many different perspectives as possible. And then as a leader, you're the decider. You decide going forward. But a lot of times by that stage, a lot of things become self-evident. That's how I solve problems, really collectively.
Steve Jobs, speaking more on the subject of jobs in Disney, he said that his most important role was recruiting. And Disney echoed that and said one of his main duties. In fact, when he was working on the Mary Poppins movie, which was considered likely that it was his crowning achievement in terms of, live action film, he personally went to the different actors and just wooed them and recruited them to be a part of this movie. And so, he knew he had to take an active role in sharing the vision in a compelling way. When you're in your day-to-day life, how focused are you on that? And let me, before I have a side note as well, because you talked about not being reactive. I think many entrepreneurs live in reactive mode. And so they don't, and not only entrepreneurs, just leaders in general that I've encountered. And it's so important. I just want to hang out here because this idea of the team and finding people and really being cognizant of that and focusing on how can I continue to share the vision and put the right people in the right seat, whether they're part of my organization or not. I mean, they could just be somebody that you meet that is able to give you some sage advice. How much of your day is focused on that? And how do you approach people when you think, wow, this is a person that I think that I need to have in my camp?
This is not hyperbolic, but 99% of my time is finding the right people. Like whether it's finding the right people, right salespeople, the right programmers, the right engineers, the right connection, I want to reiterate, it's not hyperbolic. 99% of my time is finding the right people. John Wooden had this quote. He said, when I have better players, I'm a better coach. I think there's so much to be said that everything that you need in terms of fulfilling a vision is somebody else has. Right? So people talk about money, those are resources, right? People are the ultimate resource. So from my perspective, I don't share this a lot, but I look at my role this was about, I think 3 or 4 years ago, I had this conversation. I was really self-conscious about this because there's a lot of people have some really great hard skills. Hard skills are very the tangible, the programmers, there's certain hard skills. And I remember thinking how do I seem to get ahead of people that are so much better at these hard skills? I started to learn that my grandfather always said, it's not the grades you make, but the hands you shake. And thank goodness, because I would never be able to make it anywhere if that weren't the case. But being able to find the right people will change everything. And so what I'm constantly doing, Nate, is in my mind, I'm sorting relationships. We talked about this. Ships go places. I'll give you an example, right? So when we first built the first version of the platform, it's a hiring platform. We connect employees and job seekers through this video type of interface. And one of the first things that we needed to do was obviously get companies to use the platform to give us feedback. And so when I go into making connection with people, I don't look at a particular connection through just one vertical, right? I just want to meet the individual. And then pretty quickly, I keep my mind open to where could this puzzle piece fit, right? So I walk in and that particular day, I wanted to talk to the general manager. I just walked in cold to the restaurant. General manager happened not to be there that day, but the regional manager was filling in that particular day. And so I said, hey, I'd love to talk to him. I connected with him. And right away, I identified certain attributes, the way that he spoke, how quickly he understood the concept. and then just his demeanor, right? So I picked up these different things. And in my view, I didn't come there just to fill in that end, right? Like I go into situations very open-minded. So it's like, hey, this is what I'm trying to do. And I do believe that it's good to have a direction, but I think that don't change the goal, but you can constantly reevaluate the strategy, right? So for me, like I looked at it and I was like, hey, I needed a connection. But as soon as I met Aaron, I said, gosh, what else could he particularly fit? So I'm thinking in my mind, and right away, I don't know how that's going to play out, but I do know that I need to continue to build this relationship, right? And so then we started a conversation, and he said something along, hey, I'd love to, if you ever get connected with your CEO, I'd love to tell him more of my ideas. And I said, great, I'll talk to him. We'll see if I can schedule something next week. And obviously, I lead the company, but at the time I just needed something to make a connection. We had lunch and then really started just talking about ideas. And I think a big part of it, Nate, is you really got to figure out what do people want in their lives and how does that align with where you're going, right? So, and I think you've told me about this, like the common vision, right? Often forget the way that you label leadership, but people have got to be going in the direction that you want to go as well.
That's the way I envision it. You start with shared purpose, and you have to learn about people in order to understand what their purpose is. And then as leaders, I mean, really the first aspect is discovery, right? And I think that's such an important piece, and we miss it, is spending time in discovery and observation. And we discover what passions people have. And then we explain what passions we have. And we find that if there's some overlap in terms of where we want to go, then leadership, the next component, of course, is influence, right? We say, hey, you want to get on this ship with me and let's take an adventure because this is where we're going. If you believe that you want to go there and I believe that you would benefit and we would mutually benefit, let's go on the journey. So that the last factor, of course, is achievement. So discovery, influence, and achievement, but it's all wrapped up in shared purpose. And I love how you frame that, because learning about people along the way, I think it's an art, because we're in such a go mode, especially like we don't really learn about people. How can you learn about someone in sound bites or even on a resume, a piece of paper? Or we've lost this art of actually looking into someone's eyes and communicating with them and actually having a meaningful conversation to identify whether or not this is a kind of relationship we'd want to cultivate and move forward in a direction that leads us to a better place. But I do want to ask you this. Okay, so that's from the perspective of someone that's a possible employee. How do mentors fit into your model for creating vision and moving your vision forward? How do you view mentors and how do you acquire mentors?
Yeah, that's a great question. So like I said, 99% of what I do is finding the right people. And that's no exception with mentors. And if anything, mentors, I prioritize them even over my own team. And the reason is, I don't know if you've ever played, you have a son that plays video games, right? So I'm not much of a video game player, but I've got a friend of mine who wants to play this Call of Duty. This is his favorite game, right? So I never want to play with him because as soon as I get on, within 20 seconds, I'm shot out and killed, right? And I, as a guy that likes to win, I don't want to compete in something that I have no chance on. And when he gets on there, he'll go for hours killing everybody and winning. And the difference is not that he's that much more talented than I am, but he can anticipate because he's played the game so many times, he can anticipate what's around the corner. I'm a sucker because I don't know what's around the corner, what's happening, because I haven't played the game before. And so when it comes to, I look at mentors in that same way. If they played the game, they know what to anticipate. The ability to anticipate will give you a strategic competitive advantage. Wayne Gretzky had this quote. He said, a lot of people, they ask him, how do you compete and how are you so much better than the people you play against? You're not the fastest. You're not the strongest. You're not the most skilled. And he said, yeah, but the reality is everybody goes to where the puck is. I go to where the puck is going. And so I think that one of those things that I've found is that mentors who've been there can show you where the puck's going, right? And can show you what challenges to anticipate. So hugely important. And one of the ways that I acquire mentors is through a relationship building process. So, and I find a lot of different creative ways of doing it, but I'll give you one story. So this was about a year ago, a little over a year ago. I had a family friend. here in Scottsdale. At the time, I'm living in Chicago, looking to make a move. Didn't know where I was going yet. And I said, hey, I'm going to visit Scottsdale. And while I was here, I got introduced and invited to go to this politically fundraising dinner. And I'm going to stay apolitical, so I won't say which side it was on. But I go to the fundraising dinner, and at the fundraising dinner, there's the hostess. She's connecting with everybody and showing everybody around. What I didn't know at the time is that her husband is very not interested in politics. So he was out in the back, and we're walking around, and it's this beautiful, they have a compound effectively, 2 mansions right next to each other at a pond, a couple pools, they had peacocks and the whole nine. It was just a very extravagant kind of backyard where they hold weddings and whatnot. So they just moved into the place. And so we're walking around, and we see this guy in board shorts, wearing only board shorts, working and pulling weeds and whatnot. And we walked up, and he introduced himself as the living gardener. That's how he introduced himself. And so pretty quickly, I kind of recognized that he's probably not a living gardener. And so I was with this group of people, then family friends, they'd left. I went back and started a conversation with him. I was pretty sure that he's probably owned this house, which he did. And we started this conversation. And during the course of the conversation, I'm looking at some connecting point that I can make. And so for him, he loved to train. He had all this machinery where he loved to exercise and train. And so we started this conversation. He showed me his garage where he had like $10,000 worth of equipment. And he said, hey, we have these guys that come every morning at 6:00 to train. And right away, I was like, hey, I'd love to train sometime. Great. Here's my number. Right. And so for me, like finding some type of connecting point, I get the number, and obviously I got to follow through. So the next morning I show up for a miserable workout, and I come back again, and I start building this relationship through that. So I think hobbies could be a great way, some type of interest. When I was in network marketing, they use all these formulas, which I thought was silly, because I think a lot of it, you've got to kind of feel out people, but they would say form: family, occupation, recreation, message. This was an acronym they used. And so building a rapport effectively is understanding their family, what they do for work, what they do for fun, and then whatever type of message that you would have to sell your product or service or provide opportunity. And what I found is that if you just start conversations, you'd be just amazed at how open people are to, one, talking about themselves. Everyone, including myself, generally likes to talk a little bit about themselves. But if you can find a connecting point, and I often find, and again, this is maybe an overgeneralization, but in my experience, when it comes to women, the family is generally the first, like, really connecting points or relationships. If you find some type of connecting point there. For men, I often find that recreation, something they like to do, enjoy, do for fun, or their work, if they're really passionate about their work, find some type of connecting point and just make an ask. If there's an opportunity provided, take that opportunity. Otherwise, ask. Hey, one of the best ways I've learned is, I'll do this a lot. Like, I'll go find somebody in a new particular area that's like the CEO or some executive or somewhere, and I will, there's this line between pest and persistent, and sometimes I flirt with that line, as Nate can attribute. And I think that what I found is like a great invitation is like, hey, if I bought you lunch for 30 minutes, and I'll set my timer, give me 30 minutes, I'll buy you lunch. What do you say? You'd be surprised how many people will take you up on that. And then when you find commonalities, a lot of times what I found with mentors is when they see something in you that they had at your age, or a common view on something, a much better opportunity. But as my grandfather used to always say, if you don't ask, the answer is always no. And so being able to just say, hey, can I buy you lunch? Give me 30 minutes. I'll bring a timer with me, or find something, start a conversation, find some connecting points, and then build a relationship from there. That's what it's all about, building those relationships, and that will change the game for you.
That's how we met, to bring it full circle, right? In front of a bowling alley and on a landing in Branson, Missouri, right? Blowing up some balloons and all kind of.
Yeah, you were talking about, you just finished your PhD. And so for me, just to be candid, Nate, I'm in Branson, and it tends not to attract the most intellectually astute individuals. And so for me, anywhere that I'm at, I'm still looking for people. Because again, I told you, 99% of what I do is finding the people. So through that whole summer, I met, after thousands and thousands of people, I probably met 3 people, Nate included. But imagine doing that, just starting conversations, just constantly starting conversations until you run into a gem. and you find a connecting point. And then what did I do? Right away, I think I set an appointment. I made it tangible. I said, hey, what are you doing Tuesday? Didn't know how I was going to get there at the time. I don't even think I had enough money to get there, but I was like, hey, I've got a goal. Start with back to that full vision. Start with the vision. I need to meet with this guy, and then I'll figure out the logistics, which is the how, later. That's how it happened. And then from there, the connections and everything else. I mean, you never know, and it'll always amaze you where those relationships can take you.
The way that you focus on, like you said, all of these interactions that you have, that you're sifting for that high value relationship. And that should not be underscored any less than anything else. I mean, this is hugely important in terms of how we move our vision forward. And just to give a little bit more context, I had no intention of being a mentor for somebody at that time either. In terms of, I was just, like you said, finishing my PhD work. I was having some balloons put together for my son and my niece. And we just got on a conversation. I think it started out with, and from Chicago. And of course, I'm from the west side of Chicago. So there's that first connecting point that you talk about, right? And it's real, it's genuine. And it almost reminds me a little bit of Dale Carnegie's, How to Win Friends and Influence People, right? I mean, if the heart of that book is really sincere, genuine interest in others, right? And it hasn't changed. I mean, when did he write that? I don't even know. It's been so long, but it hasn't changed. We are still human creatures, like you said, who love to share about ourselves and to find common interest, because we are communal creatures ultimately. And so that initial connecting point you had to, and then of course we talked a little bit about the pandemic and the conditions and whatnot, and kind of found some similar ground there. And then we started talking about business, and I, of course, then it started talking about my research on visionary leaders and how they form and operationalize their vision. And you started sharing a little bit about your vision for different platforms. And so these are natural conversation, right? Part of the leadership, that's discovery, right? We're discovering where there might be some common interest and some shared purpose. And then, like you said, you went in for the ask, right? I mean, you boldly said, hey, if I took a 4-hour trip to your hometown, could we have some lunch? And at first I thought, well, I've known this guy for about 10 minutes now, and it could be some crazy stalker, but sure, let's see where it takes us, because we did develop a rapport pretty quickly. And of course, then you had to certainly be mindful and do your homework, right? But here's what was happening in the background. Of course, I was doing my homework on you, but you were also doing your homework on me, right? Because when you came to see me, you had already begun to understand, okay, who is this guy? And is he someone that I would help me along my trajectory? I mean, is that how you normally operate?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it starts with curiosity. I think it's very curious. I'm very fascinated by people's stories. And so I think that when it comes to, a lot of times they always say there's the people that you like tend to fall into two categories: people that are like you and people that are someone you aspire to be. In a lot of ways, meeting you fell into the latter category. And I think one of the things that I found is, based on your kind of your academic work, it's interesting to me and how we operate and think very differently in terms of just the process, but we're going in the same direction. And so I think that when I found, at the end of the day, you have to be willing to take rejection and not take it personally. And I tell this to people, and this is genuinely how I approach it. However it sounds, it is what it is. But my mentality, if you would have said no, at that particular time, based on the way that I approach things, I would maybe even verbally said it to myself, but definitely in my head, gosh, he missed out. That guy missed out on an opportunity to have a relationship with me. And in a lot of ways, I look at that, the people in my life, as much as I value them, I still look at, hey, it's an honor for them to be part of my life. That comes right back to the beginning we were talking about, is that you're never going to outperform your self-image. And so during the pandemic, I had this job, I had this business that was doing well, and then it all went to nothing. I had to move in with my parents for a couple months in Florida, and I had to take 2 part-time jobs, one making pizzas. And don't ever buy a pizza from me. I was terrible at that. And the second one was I'd weighed meat in the meat department for the customers. And one of the things that I never lost sight of was, I am a tech CEO. If I'm making a pizza for somebody, if I am weighing me, and that comes even deeper in that I'm a child of God, I'm valued by them. And so I think that to really bring this around, like the reality is it really starts with your relationship with yourself. And I think from there, I think people generally, a lot of the how to do things, that can be learned, but the belief, which is kind of like the operating system, I always think with people, it's hardware, software, and operating system. The hardware is your body. Your operating system is your beliefs about things. Software is all the things you can learn and the skills. But if the operating system, if the belief system is off, right? Like any type of software is not going to function properly. And so when it comes to people, really understanding the value that you have and who you are. And yeah, when it comes to conversations in baseball, if you hit the ball 3 out of 10 times for your career, you're going to the Hall of Fame. So when I said besides unrealistic, no is the number one word. I hear no more times than I care to admit. But each time, Nate, when somebody says no, I legitimately, in my mind, whether it's friendship, if it's a business opportunity, I walk away thinking, gosh, you missed out. Because in full circle, the relationships that I do have in our relationship, it's been incredibly fruitful and it's been life-changing. And I'd like to think the same, on your end. And so when it comes to the opportunity that I had to say, hey, I'm going to take a chance. I'm going to put myself out there because I think I'm valuable. I think it'd be an honor for that person to be part of my life. And I'm going to give them the opportunity, almost turn the table to be part of my life and I be part of theirs. In the long run, the ones that kind of make it through that filter and have the type of relationship we have, it's incredibly enriching. And so I look at it and I think at the end of the day, understanding the value that I have as an individual, that really is the operating system. And everything else can be learned, right? And I think when you value yourself, you teach people to value you, right? And I'm a big believer that you teach other people how to treat you.
100%. I ascribe to that. And everything you're saying is hitting on all cylinders, brother. Indeed, my life has been enriched by you and continues to be enriched by you, and an honor. My life is better with you in it. And for those of us who are just moved by this conversation, just an encouragement to start to first think about and just respond to who I think I am and who I really am, who I'm called to become as I continue to move forward. There's so much power in that. I've always been a little guy. I was 5'8", probably about 5'7" now that I'm in my late 40s and shrinking. But I never looked at myself as a small person, right? I just looked at myself as this is who I am. But as far as my stature is concerned, it really made no difference in my perspective on life or how I approach the relationships and the boundaries and how I commanded, I would say, my social environment based on what I expected of myself and I expected of others around me. Relationships that I felt that were disruptive or disrespecting who I believe that I am, I would end those because they just don't go in a direction that I think is healthy and fruitful. And people start to understand your reputation of somebody that is serious about self-respect and then also giving respect to others, right? So no matter what your physical stature is, no matter what I don't even want to call them impairments, but whatever it is in your life that you think is an impairment, none of that really matters. The only thing that really matters is who you actually believe that you are. And you are so much more. You were created to be so much more. In fact, even when we self-identify, for those of us in faith as a child of God, we still don't understand the value even of those statements. So, hey, of course, we don't approach that with arrogance, but we approach it with confidence. And the confidence isn't necessarily in ourselves. The confidence is in, I've been called to a high purpose, and I will respond to that call every moment of every day of my life. And I think that there's such great beauty and merit in that. And there's an analogy people have used in the past and say, well, what if you knew that no matter what you did, that in the end, there would be whatever you determined it to be. I mean, I don't even like to use the word success because it's an arbitrary term. It can mean different things to different people. But what if you knew in the very end that you would come out successful, right? That no matter what obstacles you face, and I don't like to use the words that, you couldn't fail, right? Because we fail, but failure is not final. It's feedback, right? I mean, it's literally like, okay, that didn't work. Then I just go a different route, right? I mean, that's the way we should be wiring our brains. But if we had that approach, I think that we would try harder. We would give more. We would be bolder in our walk because we know that at the end of it, we will achieve, we will reach that destination, right? I mean, you talk about like, remember, I guess Hernan Cortez and the burning of the boats, an analogy a lot of people use. History tells us actually that Cortez did not burn the boats. It sounds great, but he scuttled the boats. And of course, regardless of the terminology, right? I mean, scuttling really just dismantling and using it on land. The boats were not available anymore. Let's just call it that, right? So he turned sailors into soldiers. And I don't even want to get into the historical context of destroying, decimating the indigenous people and all that. But the point is that are we focused on our future? Are we focused on the path? I can't go back, right? There's no going back, only going forward and holding on to who I am called to be. Jake, as we close, one day you'll be on that mountaintop and it'll be the end of the days, at least on this side of eternity. What is one sentence, one statement that you will want people to remember you by? Yeah,
so I think of that pretty regularly. So as far as people, I have to put more thought into that. But there's one phrase, and I think you already know what it is, that when I meet the God in heaven who created me, and if he can look at me and say, hey, well done, good and faithful servant. What I gave you, the resources, the abilities, the things that I gave you that you invested and you maximized. We have this saying, blazing into heaven, right? Being able to say that, hey, I'm going to play my hand and I am going to give it everything we got to the time that I'm given, a finite amount of time that I don't know the duration of. What can I do with this time given to me? I look at that as not like a pressure, but what an incredible opportunity. The chances, I don't know if you know this, but statistically, the chances of being born as a human being is 400 trillion to 1. When you want to talk about value, and if you think you're valuable or not, that like statistically, like you're an anomaly. The fact that you're a human being, 400 trillion to 1. And so when I look at that, I'm thinking, gosh, there's a lot of things that have happened in my life. And one or two things that happen, you can say coincidence, but when you see things happen again and again and again, you start to realize, hey, there's a purpose. There's a reason that I'm here. And frankly, I look at it and I often don't understand when I have conversations with people that there's this poem, one of my favorite poems. It says that, our greatest fear is not that we are powerless, but that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. Who are we to play small? You're shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you does not serve the world. We were all meant to shine, as children do. I look at it, Nate, and I think we all get a hand dealt, right? We all have a path. And I think at the end of the day, this whole notion, we get one go at this thing, one opportunity to really go for it, right? Take that chance. And I think when we look at inspiring movies or songs, consistently, you'll see some of those movies and songs and things that we listen to are by people that draw something out of us, right? Something deep inside of us that's like, hey, I should be that person. We relate to something. People that do extraordinarily great things, there's something in us that yearns for that because it's in all of us. That's the end of that poem. It's not just in some of us, it's in all of us. And so if nothing else, life's very cyclical. There's ups and downs. And at the end of the day, if you can really find a vision for something that just makes you jump out of bed and something that you think you can provide to this world, that's going to give you a sense of purpose and a joy that's really hard to explain, really hard to fake. When we have a conversation, we talk, and I think I often find with people that people talk about, how do you get people to join you? How do you get people to come alongside you? I think that they see a genuine excitement and joy. And it's like, gosh, what's that guy doing? Right? I'd love to have some of that as well. And when I see it in other people, it sparks me even more. And so I would just encourage people, we talked about this at the beginning, really understanding your value. And for my context, it's really a faith-based component, but understanding who you are as a valuable individual And then everything else will permeate that. And if you can have something compelling to work towards, even the journey, it's really the journey that I've found. And people have told me this over and over again, because I have friends that have gotten over the mountaintop, right? And they said, hey, I would kill to be in your position again, to be scaling it again. And I think that a lot of times, Jobs talked about this. After he got let go from Apple, he said that in his commencement speech that this pressure of success was taken off his shoulder and the joy of being a beginner again. And so a lot of my friends that I look at, hey, I want to be where they are. They say, hey, I'd love to be where you are in scaling. And I think we all have that opportunity. So I would just encourage you, understanding what value you have, having a compelling vision for a future. And you'd be amazed as you start going that direction, the pieces that come into play, whether it's some random guy on a corner making balloons, potentially be part of your life, or, just countless stories of how going in that direction, knowing the value, having a vision, and then just starting to boldly go in that direction, it can make all the difference.
We've got to do this again. There's so much more to Jake Dawson that I want our audience to learn about. You have been such a blessing. I'm just thrilled to be a part of your journey as well. Thank you so much. Thank you for being a part of ours.
I love you too, brother. And I'll do this anytime, especially for you. I appreciate it's very flattering to get somebody else getting your perspective. So I appreciate that and thoroughly enjoyed kind of spending time even virtually.
Well, my friend, we did it. I'm so honored you were able to join me on this episode of A Call to Leadership. Now, this might not be for everyone because you really have to be in a certain place in order to take the kind of steps to level up your leadership. And I want you to be taking steps. And for those of you who feel like you're ready for something like this, there's a place you can go. You can go to our website, greatsummit.com. I'll make sure that's in the show notes. But here's the cool thing that we have. We've got a masterclass. We have all different kinds of events. We even have our leadership club where you can meet other people just like you to go deeper in your leadership journey. You and I will get to spend some time together and really focus on aiming for greatness. I can't wait to see you there. I'm Dr. Nate Sala, and this is A Call to Leadership.